The nuclear meltdowns that happened in Three Mile Islands, Chernobyl, and Fukushima have led the Philippine Congress to feel lukewarm in establishing our own nuclear plants. The arguments whether the Philippines needs its own nuclear plant or not started in July 1973 when then President Ferdinand Marcos announced the decision to build a nuclear power plant in response to the worldwide oil crisis. Nuclear plant advocates up to the present believe that nuclear power is the solution to meeting the country's energy demands and in decreasing dependence on imported oil, while others reject the idea it will cost millions and billions of pesos and, more importantly, the lives of thousands in case a nuclear meltdown happens in our soil. Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. The Philippines has the second highest electricity rates in Asia and the ninth highest out of 44 international markets. Now, this translates to thousands of aggravated Filipino households trying to make both ends meet just to pay their monthly electricity cost. Now, of course, this also means higher investment and business operating costs. The solution, according to nuclear power advocates, is to establish our own nuclear power industry. But the opposing side has many valid points too, like the cost, the safety, and the risk of a nuclear power plant, among other things. Now, tonight, we ask the Philippines, is the Philippines ready for nuclear energy? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. Now, joining us tonight in our discussion, the advocate of nuclear energy is former representative of the 5th District of Pangasinan, Congressman Mark Cojuangco.
Good afternoon.
Mark,
yes.
Your quick thoughts on
Yes.
On this.
We used to be a leading economic power in Southeast Asia. Today, we consume 1/10 the per capita consumption of electricity compared to Malaysia, and 1/25 the per capita consumption compared to South Korea. This is because our electricity has become too expensive or in short supply.
And next we have, of course, with us also the environmental advocate and professor at the University of the Philippines National Institute of Physics, Dr. Giovanni Tapang. Doc?
Good evening.
Yeah, your 2 cents worth. Quick excerpt of your
The cost
position.
of electricity in the Philippines is because of the Electric Power Industry Reform Act, and we have other baseload sources that we can use. We don't need a nuclear power plant, especially in a volcanic and tectonic area like the Philippines.
All right. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Now, here's the question: is the Philippines ready for nuclear power plant? So we'll start off with that. And Mark, since you start, we'll start with the pro side, no?
Yes.
But the pro nuclear power plants.
Yeah, let me further stress the importance of cheap electricity. Bill Gates said that if there's any single thing you could choose to lower the price of, to reduce poverty, by far it would be energy, the cost of electricity. And there is nothing that can generate electricity more cheaply, more cleanly, and more safely than nuclear power.
Gani, the position of Mark here is that it's the cleanest historically. If you look at the stats in the past 50 years, what are your thoughts on that?
The rates in the Philippines, electricity rates, have risen because power companies tend to pass on their costs to the consumers. And in fact, we have other sources like hydropower, which is 250 pesos per kilowatt hour, and it becomes 11 pesos because of all of these added on costs. And therefore, the reason why we have a very high electricity rates is not because we don't really have these sources, it's because of the Electric Power Industry Reform Act. And number two, the reason why we don't have the sources or the generating capacity is because the government, it keeps on waiting for investors to build the power plants for us.
The magic of nuclear power is that 1 kilogram of nuclear fuel assemblies worth $1,000 is equal to 5,500,000 kilograms of coal worth 186,000
Wow.
US dollars. The amount of fuel you need is so little and so small compared to the amount of energy that you can generate from it.
Now, it's true that the main, I guess, ingredient that's used in a nuclear power plant is uranium. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you still need to. Can you explain how this is processed and how we are
Yes.
able to secure the uranium?
Natural uranium is 0.7% U-235, which is the active ingredient.
Yeah.
To make it into nuclear fuel, we have to enrich it to 2%, 2 to 3%, and then we have to fabricate this into nuclear fuel assemblies.
All right.
Now, the cost of uranium compared to the cost of nuclear fuel assemblies is only 25% of the cost.
Now, Doc, should we be concerned about uranium?
Yes.
Uranium
In fact,
in itself. You being I guess,
just like
doctor of
what
physics.
Congressman Mark said, the magic is there, and with magic comes a sleight of hand. We don't really factor in costs like decommissioning cost. We don't really factor in costs like storage or waste disposal after the fuel has been used, because no country has solved that problem yet. In fact, even the bill that Congressman Kawanko said several Congresses ago, there's a nuclear tax to be taken off from the Filipino people that would amount around 25 centavos per kilowatt hour for building this, rehabilitating the Bataan nuclear power plant.
The bill included a fee to be taken from the power generated by a running BNPP to be deposited into two funds, which would be run by the Department of Finance. A nuclear waste disposal fund and a nuclear plant end-of-life decommissioning fund.
So it assumes an operating nuclear
Yes, so
plant.
it's to set aside money to precisely get rid of whatever waste, so-called waste. I don't consider it waste. I consider it spent fuel, and I consider it fuel for the future.
Doc, we're spending like 50 million pesos on this just to maintain it. I mean, shouldn't we at least consider, since we're spending that much, shouldn't we at least consider making use of this as an asset rather than just letting it just stay idle?
Well, the problem with that is that if we are going to operate the Bataan nuclear power plant in a highly active geological and volcanic area, then we're going to risk our future even with that 50 million pesos that we're trying to worry about.
And the risk being?
The risk being that there is a volcano that is capable and there is also a active faults that have been found that are also capable to move. The recent study of Lagmay and his colleagues in 2012 have found fault lines just outside the gate or the walls of BNP.
There are fault lines that are acknowledged by all those pro-nuclear who studied this. And actually, the equipment of Dr. Caloy Arcilla, who is the head of UP National Institute of Geological Sciences, was lent to the group that Dr. Tapang is talking about to find a fault under the plant. And after a month of searching, the fault finders could not find the fault under the plant.
Of Fukushima, which the most recent one.
Oh yes,
The most recent one.
let me talk about Fukushima. I'm glad that Dr. Tapang brought this out, no? Because before Fukushima happened, I could not tell him point blank that if a 9 earthquake hit Morong, nothing would happen. But now because a 9 earthquake hit Fukushima, and I have the engineering design basis for Bataan, which is higher than Fukushima, I can categorically look him in the eye and tell him, if a 9 earthquake hits Morong, nothing will happen to BNPP. That's one. Secondly, I can also look him in the eye and tell him that if the same size tsunami that hit Fukushima hit Morong, nothing would happen to BNPP because it's much higher than Fukushima. So I can tell you that if BNPP were in Fukushima, there would be no incident to talk about.
All right.
And yet,
Doc?
the diesel plants that powered the cooling reactors in Fukushima failed. But the nuclear power plant is on a capable volcano, which is Mount
I
Nati.
think you have a picture.
And, well, this is about the fault line. It's just outside the gate of Bataan nuclear power plant. But the problem is with a volcano, there's no engineering solution that could actually prevent lahar and pyroclastic flow that will damage a nuclear power plant. And that's why in 2012, the International Atomic Energy Agency brought out these guidelines for building nuclear power plants near volcanoes. They essentially said, don't build power plants near a volcano who has had erupted less than 10,000 years ago.
This was by the IEA.
IAEA.
Yeah, the International
and they found
Atomic
that
No,
the areas
the team is
actually
local. The team is local.
Yeah, I know, but the guidelines is from the IAEA.
That's very unfortunate because the head of the team that he's talking about was my consultant when I was writing the bill the first time to ask him to define what is the safe distance from the volcano.
Yes.
And he came out with the literature and the research that showed that BNPP was indeed a safe distance from Natib. Now, there's politics even in science.
No.
And
So what is the safe distance?
the safe distance is a certain factor of the
1 kilometer away from the epicenter.
volcano, half of the volcano sliding towards the nuclear plant. So there's a certain number of kilometers based on the vertical height of the volcano that would determine the safe distance.
Now, okay. Now, and forgive me if this is I'm guessing here, but I read somewhere that if you eat a banana, you actually have more radiation than if you stood in front of a nuclear power plant for an entire year. Is this correct? Is this,
Well, it depends on the design, of course, and depends if it's certified.
Yes.
But
Assuming it's
BNPP
certified
is not
working, yeah.
certified
Okay.
as of yet.
BNPP is a certified plant.
It has not been functioning
It
as
actually generated power. You keep-
IAEA has not actually said that it can be run.
Now, unfortunately, this time we have to take a break. No, it's becoming an explosive discussion, if I may say so. But this time, before we take a break, though, let's take a look at our viewers' opinion on the issue through our online poll. Our question is the Philippines ready for nuclear energy? The results: 60% said no, we're not ready, while 40% said yes. To join the discussions online, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/solaropposingviews. Or follow us also on Twitter at opposing_views. Use the hashtag #OpposingViews. We'll take a short break. More issues about the nuclear power plant when Opposing Views returns. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. Still with us, former representative of the 5th District of Pangasinan, Marco Juanco, and Professor Giovanni Tapang of the UP National Institute of Physics. Now, our question for tonight is the Philippines ready for nuclear energy? I wanted to check with you, Mark. When it comes to waste, the nuclear waste, that seems to be, there are three things, whenever I have casual conversations, there are three things that people generally are fearful of. The waste management, the radiation, and the possible nuclear explosion.
Yes.
Let's attack the waste management first. Is there proper waste management available for the...
There's a facility in the United States called WIPP, WIPP.
Yeah.
They dispose of military nuclear waste in a salt mine.
Okay.
So this is proven, and it could be adopted for civilian. It's a political NIMBY question. In Finland, they're doing the same thing, but not in a salt mine, in a deep geological, in a granite bedrock. And in Norway, in Sweden,
So they just bury
doing.
it?
Yes, they have caverns with. They put it in cask storage, and then they dispose of it there.
It's really just storing it for the future to have to look at it and solve it. Because, for example, the one in Sweden and the one in Finland, the one in the U.S. are essentially just storing it on a site and not really processing it to make it safe and
I'm
disposing
sorry,
it
I'm
accurately.
sorry, doctor, but the one in Finland, Sweden, and the U.S. are disposing it for practical eternity.
Yeah.
For example, the one in the U.S., they have found that their salt mine is actually leaking, and it also has a
That's not true at
near moving faults, and therefore these are problems that would have
WIPP
to
is a great
look
success.
at for long-term engagement in nuclear power.
Right. Now, let's talk about radiation. Okay, let's move on from waste management. Radiation, generally, most people are, obviously with me, I might consider a nuclear plant powering my electricity so that my electricity will get lower. I might consider it, but if it was built in my neighborhood or maybe like 5 kilometers away from me, I might have an issue with that. Radiation. Mark, what are the radiation factors? When it
Radiation
comes to
is all around us.
Yeah.
It's in the soil at 2 parts per million average all over the earth. It's in the ocean at 3 parts per billion. If you took all the uranium in the ocean, it would be 4.5 trillion tons of uranium
Right.
all around us emitting radiation. If you go in an airplane, you get exposed to cosmic rays, which is higher than 10 chest X-rays.
The problem there is not just the plant emitting radiation, but the risk together with the site. That's why I keep on pointing out that the site where the BNPP is a
Your
very
position
dangerous
is mainly
site.
just for the BNPP. But how about nuclear power plants in general?
And in the Philippines, we have volcanoes, we have
We have a volcano for every square kilometer.
and we also have fault lines around and key biodiversity areas around. And therefore, the risk of emission upon failure is a big problem,
What
just
people-
like what happened in Fukushima.
What people should realize is that in Fukushima, not a single person was injured
And
or
it's
died
keeping
because
on-
of radiation.
And it's keeping
And there
releasing
were-
radiation
there
until
were-
now, and they haven't even solved the problem even until now,
Which-
several years afterwards.
which is being overblown
Yeah.
and put in the wrong context by people who don't understand or are interpreting the data very wrongly, like Professor Tan. For example, they say 300 tons of radioactive water was released into the ocean, but they never quantify the amount of radioactive substance in the 300 tons of water, which are milligrams. So it's
In the whole scheme of things, it doesn't really...
it doesn't matter because in
But
the
there
ocean,
are
because in the
mechanisms-
ocean, there are
There are
4.5
mechanisms that
trillion
actually
tons of uranium.
would concentrate this on marine mammals, marine fishes that
It
you
would have
could
an
eat.
impact.
And therefore, the long-term problem of radioactive release is what makes the problem of finding the correct site, finding the correct design for nuclear power. And for example, the BNPP fails for this one.
Oh, no, okay,
How can you say the BNPP failed when it has 3 identical sister plants running that
At
are
different sites.
that are award
Not on
winners
native,
in
not
safety,
on-
All right.
productivity, and efficiency?
All right,
But at different
let's talk
sites.
about
That doesn't matter.
let's move
It
on from
does.
radiation and waste management. Let's talk about nuclear explosion. Generally, most people think that it's going to explode. Chernobyl, of course, there was an explosion. I understand.
Fukushima had 3 or 4 hydrogen explosions, but
They were not nuclear explosions.
there are no nuclear explosions in a nuclear plant for the simple reason that it is an impossibility.
The
Is there any
explosion that
possibility?
we're talking about is not really a nuclear bomb explosion, but the failure of plants in itself.
Which
For
causes
example,
leaks.
Fukushima went very hot because the cooling system failed, and it actually went through underneath. And Chernobyl actually generated enough steam to blow away its
But
ceiling.
Chernobyl shouldn't
And therefore,
even
the
be-
problem of these types of failures is what we're worried about, not really about the nuclear weapon type.
Now, I have a question.
Of course,
But-
weaponization
Okay.
of nuclear fuel can also happen.
Go ahead.
But
which
you
is
should
happening.
not even include Chernobyl in the comparison, because Chernobyl was a weapons making plant that the Russians converted into nuclear power. It had no containment structure whatsoever. It was a reactor sitting inside a warehouse made of graphite, flammable material, which Western nuclear plants never use. In fact, if you remove Chernobyl, not a single person has died in 50 years of nuclear power, and not 20 in Fukushima were injured very slightly Nobody has done.
Let's move on now to another aspect, which is the cost naman. The cost. Otherwise, we won't finish with this debate. The cost aspect, we have to hire scientists, obviously, to run this. And
No, we don't.
We
We should not hire scientists.
Okay.
Because we don't want anybody making experiments inside our nuclear power plant. That's the very big...
So we should be hiring who?
We should be hiring engineers and nuclear plant operators.
All right.
And we should be paying them foreign rates.
Well, we think it's not because there are alternatives that we can use immediately.
How much will it take to rehabilitate?
Well, according to the estimates of Congressman Kawanka, it's
About
about
$1
$1 billion.
billion.
And that $1 billion
dollar.
can be used for other...
Now, this is where I got the $1 billion. The $1 billion is about what it would cost to build the same size coal plant as BNPP. But it would produce power at half the price. Instead of selling the power at 5 pesos, 4.50 per kilowatt hour, we could BNPP could sell it at 2 pesos to 2.50 and still make a peso profit. So that's the big difference.
Okay. Do you agree though that the cost for of electricity will get lower
fact,
if we have a nuclear
for example, hydropower is 250 and yet we still pay 11 pesos. So in a circumstances like this one is that even if we source it from different generators, we will still have the problem of high electricity prices.
problem with
and therefore, even with the BNPP, with the 1 billion, with the nuclear tax,
That's not
with the decommissioning tax, etc.,
Can we really lower
it
the
will still
electricity rates?
increase the price.
The reason why hydropower is expensive is because there's a limited amount of sites in the Philippines where you could develop hydropower. Our area, it's an island, is only so big in terms of square kilometers and can only catch so much rain. The terrain is only so much where you could put a dam. And the hydropower in the Philippines is being used for peaking power, which is a special application for hydropower. That's why it's priced so expensive, because there's only so much of it. So a nuclear plant is a base load power plant.
All right.
And so
And just for the benefit of televiewers, what do you mean by base load?
base load power means power available 24/7,
And
not relying on whether the sun is up or there's clouds or the wind is blowing or not blowing.
We have base load, for example, in Malampaya. We have base load in geothermal. We can use other
Malampaya is natural gas. Right?
natural gas
not-
that,
okay.
Which is
that can be
already-
piped already.
Which is
here.
already utilized to its peak. You
No,
cannot
not
build
yet.
any more plants with Malampaya because the existing gas supplies is good for another 20 years, and that's it.
And in fact, if you use it solely, we can still, Malampaya has still the potential to power the
Now,
Philippines.
Doc, I'll throw the question now. Are we out of...
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
but we need to double our generating capacity by 2030. The DOE has projected, DOF has projected that we need to build one new BNPP size plant every year for the next 16 years.
And the government
just
has
to
been
make up-
ignoring this.
just to make
and
up,
waiting for
just to keep up with
investors to
growth,
do it.
not including retiring capacity.
Now, are we out of date? Because I read through the articles that I've been going through, most of the first world countries have nuclear power plants, and they seem to be doing fine. In the U.S., they have quite a number of nuclear power plants there, and there's been no accident. Doc, are we getting too scared? Is it too
they're not
much
in
of a fearful position that we're taking here?
They're not in a volcanic country. They're not in a very tectonically active country. And therefore, that's what we're trying to
But
say.
Japan, South
And-
Korea, China, they have
And
some,
look at their designs. They have not factored in problems like tsunamis. They have not factored in problems like fault lines. that
I've
they have not
already,
discovered
I've
yet.
already told you that if BNPP was in Fukushima, none
it's
of this
not-
would have happened.
The
Because-
volcano problem is
because
still there.
BNPP is built much stronger
why not, let's say, renewable energy, like geothermal?
because
and,
most of the renewable energy,
Yeah.
if not practically all of it, is not base load in character. And so it would burden the grid with grid instability if we were to put a percentage above a certain amount. In other words, you need conventional power, you need base load capacity to allow renewable energies to come in. And since we're at that point where we practically have no reserves because we've postponed building plants for so long, there's no space for RE to enter into our grid without destabilizing it.
All right, we have a few minutes left. I'd like to hear your thoughts. And you were talking about it off air earlier about the economic toll that this will take if we don't have maybe the BNPP or a nuclear power plant. Just quick thoughts, Mark, on what will happen if we don't have a nuclear power plant.
BNPP, if it sells its power at 2 pesos, 250 per kilowatt hour versus the current 450, 5 pesos per kilowatt hour, will make 12 billion pesos a year. But that's peanuts to the economic opportunity cost, which is resulting because power is too expensive in the Philippines. If I told you that we would forego 1% of GDP because electricity was too expensive, I think it's very plausible.
Yeah.
If I take that back to 1984 to now, we're not talking in billions, hundreds of billions. We're talking of trillions of pesos of lost economic opportunity. I could say that our economy should be double the size it is today if we did not have power crisis and expensive power.
Doc, do you think that it will take an economic toll if we don't have a nuclear power
Energy,
plant?
if we don't have energy, but
for sure.
that energy did not come from nuclear power.
Doesn't need to purely come from
Yes, and in
nuclear.
fact, there are other alternatives.
And you think those are sufficient?
Base load power that
You
we
think
can
the alternatives are
sufficiently
sufficient?
to drive our
And are
economy.
Sufficient and efficient?
Yeah.
I disagree because if that were so, then we would already be seeing them in place today.
Because
They're
there is
not
a
in place
policy
today
problem
because
in
they
the
are
government
economically
right now.
unviable. That's
right.
why they're not in place.
Well,
today.
unfortunately, we can go on ahead. Maybe we should do that visit to
Yes,
BNPP and
please.
check it out. No? Unfortunately, we're lacking on time at the moment, so we'll have to cut it short. There's an internet meme which circulated recently saying, "With great power comes great electricity bill." Of course, you may argue that this is a joke and should not be taken seriously. But at times, jokes are half meant. The reason why we are the second in Asia in terms of electricity cost is that we are too much dependent on imported oil and powerful and private monopolies to generate our electricity supply. Now, it's about time that the government steps in. Now, the government should ensure that electricity supply is affordable, consistent, and evenly distributed even in the nation's outskirts. Now, one thing is clear in our discussion tonight. There is a need for the Philippines to establish its own stable, large-scale industry of electricity generation, something affordable and something that our children would appreciate, whether it is nuclear power or not. Now, to not act now on this is the greatest risk that we have to face as a nation. Where do you stand? Electricity as a human right or a commodity that needs to be purchased? All right, at this point, let's take a final look at our online poll. Our question, does the Philippines need a nuclear energy? The accumulated votes from all our online platforms, yes, 45%, and no, 55%. And that's our opposing views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion on the most relevant issues of today. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Good night and God bless.